Hello, and welcome to our candidate forum. Today I'm here with school board candidate David Reke, running here in Davenport. Now, David, I know a lot of issues have come up, but I'm wondering, can you explain to me the funding gap here in the Davenport Community School District?
I sure can, John. The funding gap here is that the state of Iowa gives Davenport Community Schools $175 less per student. Now, that might not seem like much, John, but when you add up those $175 for every student here in Davenport, that adds up to $2.7 million that we don't receive that other school districts would receive in the same situation. What does that mean for Davenport Community Schools? Well, if we had $2.7 million to spend, the extra that we don't have now, for example, we have a school closing that we have scheduled in 2 years for an elementary school that's going to save us $1 million in operating costs. If we had $2.7 million to spend extra, we could keep that school open and still have $1.7 million to spend on our teachers and our children. Another way to think about it is this. It's as if the state of Iowa is telling us that a child here in Davenport is worth $175 less compared to other students in the state of Iowa. That is unacceptable, and we need to have funding equality legislation passed from the state of Iowa as soon as possible.
Now, what have you been doing to help fix this funding gap that's been going on?
That's a great question, John, and here's why. If you look at all 6 of the candidates running for school board this year, I would bet that every single one of them is going to support funding equality for our children. What's going to set aside some candidates from others, though, is how much energy, time, and effort that those candidates have already put in to getting funding equality for our children. So here's a few of the things that I've done, and I'm going to go through them quickly because there's a lot here. So first of all, last year when I started thinking about running for school board, I started meeting with state legislators here in the Quad Cities to learn more about funding and the funding mechanisms here in Iowa. At that point, I was meeting with them one-on-one and telling them you should support funding equality in the next legislative session. Then, shortly before the legislative session, there were multiple forums going on here in the Quad Cities for our state legislators, and I was raising my hand and asking tough questions about do you support funding equality? Then, during the legislative session, I traveled to Des Moines, met with the State Director of Education for 45 minutes in our state capitol, and for those 45 minutes, I pressed him on funding equality. Then, that same day, I traveled to other political organizations in Des Moines and was talking to them about funding equality. Then, a week later, Governor Branstad comes to town, and I'm raising my hand at his event and saying, does funding equality have your full support? Following the legislative session, we did not get funding equality for our children. So, for the past few months, I've been meeting with candidates both on the Democratic and Republican side who are running for governor and asking them and pressing them, please support funding equality in our schools.
Well, how can the people at home help David Reke fix this funding gap?
That's an important question, John. And the reason why is that we need every citizen of Davenport on board in helping us achieve funding equality. And one of the most simple but most impactful things you can do as an individual citizen is that if you're a Republican or if you're a Democrat, you're going to have people running to be your party's nominee for governor next year. And what you can do is you can show up to their events, you can raise your hand, or maybe just grab the candidate and shake them a bit, but say, hey, we need funding equality. Where do you stand on this? Are our children worth the same as children in other school districts? If you do that, they'll see it's important to you, and then we'll be much more likely to get the job done for us.
Well, thank you so much for your time, David. Don't forget, if you have a question for David Reke, leave it in the comments below. He'll be more than happy to answer any questions you have. And lastly, the election is Tuesday, September 12th. Don't forget to vote for David Reke, Davenport School Board. Thank you very much.
Thank you.